Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you back from D.C. I'm glad you made it. Did you have any difficulties coming back to the States?
Well, I had a little encounter with the TSA, Dr. Paul. I wrote about it on LouRockwell.com, and a lot of people are reading about it. And we've done the show a few times, so I wondered if I was on their hit list.
Oh, boy.
It's pretty bad. I feel worse for my little girl than for myself. But
Right. Well, good to see you back.
Good to
and
be back.
We had a pretty nice time up at our conference.
it was a great success, and I think it gets better every year, and it's just because I think the people are so much more in tune this year. They were so happy and familiar with our work, and there were so many of them, and it was kind of a potpourri. The speakers were different. They mixed it up, and I was quite happy. How did you feel, Dr. Paul?
You know, I thought it was neat, but I was really impressed. A lot of times at a conference they say, who came the furthest to our conference? Well, we didn't ask that question, but I did meet a very nice couple from Switzerland. And that was really neat. And they came and they were true believers. And they indicated that there were a lot of people in Europe and the people they know that are interested. Of course, we're not in the majority.
Yeah, the Swiss couple was terrific. I had a long talk with them too, and they were so nice and so sweet. They came a long way. I'd love to see them out again at a conference.
Right. Well, today I want to talk a little bit about Afghanistan. Still in the news. It's been in the news for a few years, and recently it's been in the news because it's an anniversary, a 17-year anniversary. And we haven't quite won the war yet. Matter of fact, we're losing the war, and they're talking about surrendering and leaving, sort of Vietnam War style. But other people want to keep it going. But it's been going on for a long, long time, and it started, of course, with 9/11, which was 9/11/01. Well, within a week, the resolution was passed to authorize military force to go after the bad guys. 1 week over. They were supposed to investigate and find out who the bad guys were. So within a couple more days, on 10/7, just in a month, Of course, there was this massive invasion of Afghanistan because everybody knew that the bad guy was in Afghanistan. But what did the leader of Afghanistan say? He said, well, if it is bin Laden and he's here, we'll help you and we can try him. And nothing happened. We totally ignored that. And of course, bin Laden disappeared and took a long time to find out where he was. But the whole thing is, if you read this recent article by Margulies, this fantastic article that was on Zero Hedge, he summarizes this in a short period. Sometimes summaries are really long and complicated, but he hits all the point to explain the insanity of everything that we do. And the truth is, this was not an easy resolution to vote for with very, very little enthusiasm. But going back and looking at it, it indicates that, we've been under attack, 3,000 people killed. We shouldn't ignore it. We should investigate it and find out who the guilty parties are and deal with it. Even back then, I had suggested, well, if bin Laden is the bad guy, use mark and reprisal and go get him. But this authority, though, didn't use that at all. They already knew. It was sort of like they knew about the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act during that period of time was passed. It was all in the motion. So this invasion was in the motion. It just gave an excuse, for us to pursue a policy that we were planning to do anyway. So this is, just fits into the conspiracy people. Well, why is it done then if they didn't plan the whole thing? Of course, I can't sort all that out, but it sure looks very suspicious when you know and find out that the Patriot Act was already written and this plan was there. And what are the reasons? Well, we're there to, spread democracy and help the women and do all this sort of thing. But it doesn't seem to be happening. It seems to be a total failure. And now the big thing is what do we do now? There's a suggestion that, last week we're making progress. We're having conversation with the Taliban, and we're going to work out a peace agreement. So the program that Trump started a year ago, amping up the troops again, and different strategy, and that's all we needed, was better military people with a better operation. We can solve this problem. We can win this war. 17 years, and now they're back at square one. They're no better off then. And just think of the tragedy of all that's happened during this time. So I'm not expecting much good to come out of the discussions that are going on right now.
You know, the thing about the Taliban, if you remember right, 9/11 was a pretext for the invasion. But I remember very clearly in the late 90s under Clinton, there was a years-long demonization program about the Taliban, over and over about what horrible extremists they were, what terrorists they were. They were responsible for everything. And yeah, they blew up those statues, and of course that was played over and over again. Just shows how extreme and horrible they were. Nobody likes to see the statues blown up. But this was a long demonization process, and when 9/11 hit, they were able to pull the trigger, as you say, just like the Patriot Act. It was sitting here on the shelf, just waiting. But I think they were preparing us for an invasion of Afghanistan for a long time.
And I think if this resolution had been done in an honest fashion, we would have had to have a serious discussion with the Saudis. If anybody deserved a lot closer scrutiny and penalties, would have been Saudi Arabia, because, you know, it just turned out that 15 out of the 19 came from Saudi Arabia, and the family that was left in the country, that is probably the biggest insult. They were all ushered out of the country, given their private flights, and all of us had to stand around for days trying to get back to our homes. So it did not have any semblance of looking, you know, for the truth. And I think obviously this is why we're in the mess. But the other thing that prolongs it, and I think this is an important overall issue, and that is the people who are seen as defending the homeland always win, no matter how big the odds are. I think that's why we lost in Vietnam. I think that's why we won in our revolution, and that's why everybody loses in Afghanistan, because the tribes love their way of living and they don't want outsiders in, and that's what the Taliban's all about.
And Eric Margulies does make that great point, that the Taliban was formed originally. It was a group of religious students of Pashtuns who were studying in Pakistan, and they had originally formed this Taliban, which means something like young students, I believe, as a response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the civil war around that Soviet invasion. And they were furious because, as all war does, it provides for the rise of mafia-type cartels, profiting off of it, maltreatment of women under this civil war with the Soviets in, and also the rise of drug production and all of these things. That's what they rose to get rid of. They rose to fight foreign influence in their country. It's not a terrorist, and never has been a terrorist organization as we would understand, going abroad, looking to blow things up to get their point across. It was a response to foreign interventionism, at the time Soviet foreign interventionism. But here we go, we bit onto it and became ourselves the foreign invaders, and we, as you say, we caught the wrath of those who defend their homeland. You know,
I've mentioned this story before. In the Air Force, I was in Peshawar, Pakistan. We drove up to the border, which was at the Khyber Pass. And of course, up there was an underground cave. It was sort of a private little Hong Kong where the bad guys and the good guys were trading a lot. But we were standing on a little rise, looking down on the border and looking at the checkpoint, which was operated by the Afghans. And I can remember clearly that there was a single woman by herself with a little satchel walking from Afghanistan into Pakistan, which is, you know, not a big event. But now I just remember, especially since they're being charged, how horribly they treated women. But under their code, they said, because the military officers that I was with were always concerned about security. And they say, that woman does not have to worry. You know, the Afghans treat their women differently and with respect. Now, that was their opinion, and that is what happened. So it was so much different that the claim now is that we have to go over there and teach them how to respect women. Harvey Weinstein, or whatever his name is, I guess we'll send him over there to instruct them how to treat women.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, Eric, as you point out, it's a great summary, and he does a really good job really breaking it down. $4 trillion spent on this horrible war. Even if you don't like domestic spending, imagine what could be done with that $4 trillion back in the economy. 2,371 U.S. soldiers dead. 20,320 wounded. Some of those wounds, as you know, Dr. Paul, are pretty horrific and life-changing. But of course, we don't know how many Afghans are killed, civilians, military, police. We don't know because we don't care.
Right.
The U.S. government doesn't care. They don't keep track. But Margulies points out, and I don't think we've talked about it on the show, but we talked about it between us. What happened last week was amazing. The Taliban forces had occupied a very strategic city of Ghazni for 3 days. It's on a couple of very important roads.
Right.
They just went in and took it. They held it for 3 days, and as Erik writes, it took U.S. B-1 bombers, Apache attack helicopters, A-10 ground attack aircraft, U.S. warplanes from 3 separate countries, and the 5th Fleet. It took all of these 3 days to drive these Taliban out of this town. And what did the Afghan army do, the Afghan police that we've spent billions training, they put up a light fight and then they ran off.
You know, there's another point that Erik makes, and that has to do with the Taliban. The Taliban are not the drug dealers. Matter of fact, they detest the use of drugs, and it's our side that benefits the CIA and others, and it's probably a lot of corruption too. It might not be an official policy, but the drug dealing does involve us. It involves the Pakistani and the ability to travel and the finances. So that is not it. But one thing that seems to be bringing people together, believe it or not, there is a consensus in Washington now that there is no reason to continue. There's no reason for us to continue the war, and that's why the reassessment is coming up again. But then again, that seems to be a consensus. Actually, there's some who want to continue it, but there's no justifiable reason to continue it. So there are a few, and I see there's something in the news today about Erik Prince. He has a suggestion of what we should do, and he's been accused. All he wants to do is privatize the war, but I don't think it's quite that point that he's making.
Well, the thing about what Erik Prince wants to do, he's the founder of Blackwater. They call it a mercenary group, a private army group. At the risk of, and I tweeted her before the show that we were going to talk about this, and I said, should we privatize it? I meant to be a little provocative to get the conversation started. A couple of people got mad and thought we were going to sign on to it. That's not the point we want to make, though. But he does seem to analyze the problem correctly. He does seem to diagnose, as a doctor might say, the problem right. He says, hey, it's a total failure, the 17-year war. It's cost billions of dollars, actually trillions, and thousands of lives. That's a very good point. He says that, that the president's only been presented with 2 options, either increase troops or pull troops completely out and abandon Afghanistan. But that's where he comes in with his new proposal. Now, his new proposal does sound good on paper, okay? Let's be honest. He talks about reducing manpower requirements, U.S. manpower requirements by 85%, reducing spending on the war from $62 billion a year to $10 billion a year, reducing U.S. military presence from 15,000 to under 2,000, reducing contractors from 30,000 to 6,000. So on paper, especially if you're the kinds of conservatives that like privatizing things like this, you would say, well, gosh, that makes sense on paper. But the point we talk about is the policy.
Well, yeah, he doesn't deal with policy. He deals with a technical and a tactical approach, because he still talks about using contractors, maybe one of his subcontractors. He still wants the special forces used. He still wants air cover. So we would still be very, very much involved. And I think the issue is that he's not looking at this philosophically. He's not looking at his foreign policy. He's not looking and say, what are we there for? And nobody agrees there's a reason for being there. So there is only one answer. Just get out. My line to summarize this in the debate was, we just marched into these places. Why don't we just march out instead of, oh, well, we just can't leave them go. We have to rebuild what we destroyed. Oh, let's appropriate another $20 billion because we've destroyed it. And look at how the money still pours into Iraq and management and occupation. It never stops. But it's going to stop. Now, Erik mentioned one thing that I thought was interesting, very encouraging. He says the Americans are running out of bombs. Yeah. How many bombs have we dropped on that country? And how many bombs on the Middle East? And, the historic high was probably Vietnam. I imagine by now that we've dropped more bombs in the Middle East than we did in Vietnam, and that means probably 10 times as many bombs as we dropped in World War II. I mean, it's total insanity. And if they don't understand non-interventionism, they don't understand a homeland mentality, and they don't understand blowback, they can't possibly win. And just changing tactics and changing the military leaders. This is a military strategy, slightly different, but this is what we need to do. So I don't know. Did Bolton have much to say about this? Is he going to endorse this program?
Well, actually, I do have a quote. I'm going to pull it up in a second. But the thing about running out of bombs, I'm sure everyone in D.C. I spent a couple of days before the conference.
Oh yeah, more bombs to build.
Yeah, they love it. But just getting things ready and getting things in order. Every year, it surprises me how many new high-rises you see from defense contractors. Prime real estate everywhere. Going on Crystal City, all these places just full of it. So there's a lot of money. But here's something that also struck us both very much by the article we both read, and antiwar.com had it up today about the Erik Prince thing. And if we could put it up, I think this is absolutely fascinating. And people may not get the implications of what Bolton is saying here. But here's Bolton quoted in an article about Prince wanting to privatize the war, although he doesn't want to call it privatization. Here's Bolton, John Bolton, U.S. National Security Advisor. We've looked at several different possibilities to get the Taliban and others directly engaged with the government of Afghanistan. He goes on to say, the president's view is that he'll support the government of Afghanistan in its efforts to see if the Taliban are ready finally to talk seriously. When you think about that, it seems like some pretty anodyne quotes. But to me, that represents a radical shift in policy. Because for 17 years, for 16 years, we were going in there to vanquish the Taliban, to destroy these evil terrorists. And now the whole purpose of the war seems to be to get the Taliban to talk to the U.S.-backed Afghan government. And if that's the case, that shift is monumental.
And the one part of that speech,
actually, if you can pull it back up, because
that I wanted to make comment on. And that is the last line. Bolton said, however, that the U.S. was intent on never allowing 9/11 attack from happening again. Well, that's a good idea, but everything he talks about, he's more likely to cause another. He said, the bottom line is the security of the United States. Yes, we should provide security, but the top line, the most important thing, is that we provide and protect our liberties. And what they're doing is a jeopardy to our liberties, and it doesn't make us safer. Matter of fact, if they don't understand this, then there's going to be a greater incentive for a blowback. It could be a financial blowback. All that we're doing now, I think that we are aggravating a lot of people, and they're driving people away from the dollar, and people are ignoring it. The markets are still ignoring it, but there's going to happen. So I think if we lose what our responsibility is in government, and that is the preservation of liberty, and then things work out. That means that we don't ignore security. It just means that if we have our liberties and our freedoms in our home, that doesn't mean we have a policeman. We don't order the policeman there. What we do is we protect ourselves with security cameras and maybe a gun. Yeah. And that's the way most houses in this country are protected. So I think they don't have a proper understanding, because it's all directed by, you already mentioned, by special interests, by powerful people, banking industry, military industrial complex, and that has to be challenged. But it's going to be, and it'll be challenged when we go broke.
Yeah, exactly. And the point about security, okay, you're concerned about American security. You've just spent $4 trillion. We've got $21 trillion in debt that we'll talk about. As you've always said, there's plenty more. And you're inflaming passions against the U.S. around the world by bombing a bunch of people who can't afford sandals. So how does this enhance our security, as you say? So I hope people will start questioning this idea that these kinds of wars enhance our security. They destroy our security. But my final closing note is that I want to say we had promised to live stream the conference over the past weekend. I want to apologize to everyone who tuned in for a live stream. Unfortunately, we had a critical piece of equipment that was damaged in flight, and we were not allowed to stream it because that equipment was not working. However, we're working double time. Our producer is working double time to get out these clips, and we're going to start actually, in fact, hopefully putting the first of the several clips from the conference up today. So we want to get it out right away, so if you weren't there, you can see the conference, and those of you who were there who can see it again. And again, I want to thank everyone who was interested in it, particularly everyone who spoke at it, everyone who attended it, all the sponsors, and let's hope we can do it again next year, because it does grow every year. Dr. Paul?
Very good, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in today. And you know, every battle that we go into, every war that we start, we have to have a fancy name to it to symbolize our greatness and why we are the freedom lovers of the world and all of history. So from 2001 to 2014, it was Operation Enduring Freedom. It didn't work too well. All we did was cause chaos and killing, and nobody was more free. Everybody was less free and more broke. So they changed the name to Operation Freedom Sentinel, and that's the name of it now. Not many people brag about that name, and that's the name of the war going on since 2015. Names mean nothing. Ideas are very important. The ideas of non-interventionism is the most important thing in foreign policy. Mind our own business, protect our liberties, and look inward in the sense that we don't have to go marching around the world telling other people how to live. But in the same sense, if we follow that type of policy, it's a sort of an openness to trade and talk with people and settle disputes in a much different way. This method, what we have done since 2001 has been a total disaster, and it will be damaging to us for many, many years to come. Just as the Soviet system collapsed for financial reasons, I think they're going to look back and read the history of what we did in the Middle East and what we continue to do as the example of what brought us to our knees. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.